Ghostly tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey, everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese. Ghostly Tales from Liao Zhai. Today, I'm going to tell you two short stories. The first story is titled Spitting Water. In ancient times, during the period when Mr. Song Yushu from Liang served as a local official, he once rented an extremely remote house. To take better care of his elderly mother, Mr. Song had her and the servants move in with him. One night, while Mr. Song was fast asleep in his bedroom, the two servants were chatting with his mother in her room. Suddenly, they heard the sound of water spouting in the courtyard, much like a tailor spraying water on clothes. Intrigued, Mr. Song's mother urged the servants to go and see what was happening outside. The servants were a bit scared, so they discreetly made a small hole in the window paper to peep outside. There, they saw an old lady standing in the courtyard. She was short and hunched, with hair like a broom and a 2-foot-long bun on her head. The old lady kept circling the well in the yard, walking in a strange manner, like a majestic crane taking large, jerky strides. Her movements were eerie as she seemed to be spitting water from her mouth continuously, as if she had an endless reservoir inside her. The servants were astonished by what they saw and immediately rushed to Mr. Song's mother to describe everything they had witnessed. Frightened, Mr. Song's mother stood up, and with the support of the servants, approached the window to see what was really going on. Suddenly, the old lady in the courtyard turned her head, facing Mr. Song's mother's window, and kept coming closer. Step by step, she reached the window and began spitting water towards the window frames. The window paper was instantly broken by the water, and all three people inside the room fell to the ground, but Mr. Song was still completely unaware of what was happening. The next morning, when Mr. Song woke up and tried to visit his mother, there was no response no matter how hard he knocked on her bedroom door. Panicking, he quickly fetched tools and pried open the door. To his shock, his mother and the two servants were lying side by side on the floor. His mother and one of the servants had already passed away, but the other servant seemed to still be alive. Mr. Song helped the servant drink some warm water, and after a long while, she slowly opened her eyes. The servant was weak and recounted in fragments what had happened. Deeply saddened and amazed, Mr. Song thoroughly investigated the spot where the old lady appeared in the courtyard and had a hole dug more than 3 feet deep. As they dug, they found strands of white hair poking out. As they continued, they unearthed a corpse. Mr. Song carefully examined the body and discovered that it was the same old lady the servant had described seeing last night. This corpse had been buried here for an unknown period, yet its face looked as if it belonged to a living person, without any signs of decay. Fuming with anger, Mr. Song ordered the servants to fiercely beat the corpse with sticks. Strangely, there was no blood, and all that came out was clear water. This story tells of a malevolent ghost, a common belief in ancient China. People sometimes thought that those who died with resentment would transform into malevolent ghosts. They would harbor grudges within themselves or in certain objects, much like curses. When people unintentionally lived in a house with malevolent ghosts or used objects with lingering resentment, these malevolent ghosts would unreasonably kill them, Historically, there was indeed a person named Song Yushu, a well-known poet during the Qing dynasty. However, he suffered a difficult fate, having been falsely accused twice and ultimately dying away from home at the age of 59. In the story, the author draws parallels between Mr. Song and his deceased mother, and the old lady who spits water represents the symbol of the villains who falsely accused him. Finally, Mr. Song beating the old lady also represents the author's hope for those villains to be punished. The second story is titled, Tiny People in an Ear. Tan Jinxian was a student at the county school who was deeply obsessed with practicing Qigong for health and longevity. Regardless of whether it was the freezing winter or scorching summer, he persisted in his practice without interruption. After some time of training, he believed that his cultivation had made progress. One day, while he was meditating in a cross-legged position, he suddenly heard a voice in his ear, sounding like a fly buzzing softly, saying, "You can come out now." Tan Jinxian opened his eyes upon hearing the voice, but there was no one in sight. Thinking he must have misheard, he closed his eyes again and continued his practice. However, after a while, he heard the voice again. This time, he believed that his inner alchemy was about to be successful, and he felt delighted. From that moment on, whenever he practiced Qigong, he would hear someone whispering in his ear. Curious, he thought. What if I respond when I hear the voice again? One day, he heard the voice in his ear once more, and he softly replied, "You can come out now." Shortly after, he felt a sharp pain and itch in his ear, as if something was really coming out. Sneaking a glance at his shoulder, he discovered a tiny person, about 3 inches tall, standing there. The tiny person had an ugly and grotesque appearance, resembling a demon or a ghoul. It jumped to the ground and scurried around like a frightened mouse without finding an escape route. Tan Jinxian was astonished as he watched the tiny person and kept observing to see what would happen. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door from outside. It seemed like a neighbor who wanted to borrow something. The neighbor kept knocking and calling Tan Jinxian's name. The tiny person heard the knocking and appeared in a state of panic, continuously running around the room as if it couldn't find a way out. Tan Jinxian's consciousness started to blur, as if his soul was leaving his body. He continued to gaze at the tiny person until it disappeared before his eyes. From that day on, Tan Jinxian became foolish and kept howling incessantly. His family had no choice but to take him to seek medical treatment. It took over half a year for him to gradually recover. In ancient China, many people pursued the idea of immortality and were obsessed with various methods of cultivating health and longevity. They often consumed strange substances, firmly believing in their effects. However, they were unaware that these substances often contained toxic elements, leading to hallucinations and even life-threatening situations. Perhaps this story serves as a cautionary tale about such practices. All right. That's all for today's ghostly tales. Spitting water and tiny people in an ear. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumb up and subscribe. We'll see you in the next episode.